Hi everybody, thank you for joining us and welcome to the fourth webinar in the 5 in 5 series. So today's webinar is going to be where have all your customers gone, which is I'm sure a question you would love to get answered. So today we're going to look at where your customers will be choosing to spend their time as customer engagement seems to be declining. So as per usual, you can download the slides from the slide widget. We'd really love to hear your questions, so make sure you post them in the Q&A widget, or if you'd like to, join us for a Twitter chat afterwards using the hashtag 5in5. Now it's over to you, Jeremy.
Hi everybody, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I can already see some familiar faces online. People have logged in at the moment. Really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. This is coming to the end of the series that we're doing on this actually. Where have all your customers gone? And it's a really big one. This is probably the hardest one for me to write. What we've done is we've got a third of new stuff that we've never shown before, a whole load of new stats. So this is some good stuff. If you need statistics about where the world is going and stuff that you want to build in to your own decks or talk to your customers about stuff, there's going to be some good things here. Hopefully you've not heard before. And we're going to go over some old ground as well. We're going to cover some of the previous webinars we've done just to try and pull everything together. Because when we think about where have all your customers gone, first of all, it begs the question, have they really gone anywhere? Are they just hiding? Have they actually disappeared altogether? Is the marketing industry very dark and it's just getting harder and harder to do our jobs as people bounce between different channels and behave differently? Well, I thought we should dig into all of that a lot more. We started off really with the questions, how can predictive intelligence help to prepare for the future? Now, we're going to look at that a little bit. We'll look at the evolution of that. Some people are calling prescriptive. Some people are calling AI. What does that mean? Is it artificial intelligence or augmented? How are customers changing the way that they use social, and what is that impact on your brand? Social has changed radically over the last 3 years. That'll be interesting, just having a look at that. And also, what is the future of apps? So we pointed this towards developers and also towards technical people as well as just the marketers, because some of the implications for this stuff is phenomenal. And the impact on brands and the way that they behave, it's going to be pretty seismic over the next few years. So hopefully, whereas the past series of webinars that we did was very much kind of looking back, and it was almost like a mini marketing MBA with strategy, what we're trying to do looking forward now is where's the world going to go between now and 2020, 2022? Raises a whole load of very interesting questions. So here we are. We're on the fourth one. You can go back and see all the previous ones that we have. Why don't people love brands anymore? What do your customers really want, and who is your audience? I wanted to open really with a quote, and this is one of my best friends in the marketing industry, a guy called Javier Sanchez-Lamalas. He wrote a beautiful book that we mentioned in the last webinar called Marketing. It talks about the head and the heart. Make decisions with our hearts, justify them with our heads. And I thought, when you're kicking off this new series and also you're looking at the new changes in customer behavior, think about this. Great marketing is not about giving people what they want. It's about making people feel what you want them to feel. If you remember only one thing from this book, make sure it is the previous sentence. And Javier Sanchez-Lamalas was the CMO of Coca-Cola, and he said that's one of the most important things that we must remember going forward. So we're going to cover some of that. We're going to look at this battle for people's attention, battle between click to buy, click to sell, click to share. We're going to have a look at what that looks like. Many of you know me, know that I'm the evangelist for IBM. Spend a lot of my time within Watson Marketing. We have a whole bunch of very interesting tools that we go out of our way not to try and sell you on calls like this, because it's very much about trying to add value to you and your jobs. We just want to try and make the best marketers in the world even better. But are you familiar with our products? We've got a whole bunch of interesting things there that cover all the types of technology that we're going to be talking about over the next 45, 50 minutes. And we've got time for Q&A at the end. So we should start off with the series that we came from originally, this priority pyramid. I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but this really sets the groundwork, because if we are going to talk about where marketing is going and really have all your customers gone somewhere, we've got to make sure that in order for us to have a good answer to that makes sense, we're actually doing all the right things. And the previous webinars that we did was covering all of this stuff. It was the foundation of customer analytics. The 5 W's. First of all, to understand if people have disappeared or not, we need to understand where they were in the first place, right? Who are your customers? What did they say? Why did they say these things? Where did those conversations take place and what channels? When did those conversations happen? And then you start looking through personalization and how you're coming from all the different channels. We're looking at our paid data and purchase and IoT, connected products, all of our GPS, everything from search and our web analytics. And then once we start combining that with the different channels that we have, we can start figuring out where to spend our money. We can figure out which channels that we should be spending it on. We'll look at that shortly as well. We'll look at things like TV and social and digital and apps and voice and where that money should be going. And ultimately, can we actually generate leads? Or more importantly, can we generate attention for whatever it is that we want to do? Not necessarily going to have a sales. Some non-profits on the phone. People have just got a cause or an idea that they wanted to promote. And marketers have always been in the front line of this. They've always been trying to understand what customers want and exactly what they want to do next. That's why when I heard this statement from Will.i.am, who I love him to death, I think he's absolutely fantastic. He's mad as a badger. Anyone that knows him has seen any interviews that he's done. We all know he's a little bit crazy. He calls himself the future. Incredibly intelligent person. But he wrote an article in The Drum not too long ago, the marketing magazine based out of the UK. He said marketing is not the way forward. Really? Is that true? And he goes into detail about, when you look at kind of tobacco marketing, and they did such a great job and they caused all of these health issues. Look at people that have been promoting foods. Maybe there's too much sugar in them, foods over decades when maybe they weren't the healthiest things in the world. The marketers have caused obesity. And he's really just saying that marketers ruined everything. Marketing is not the way forward. Now, we're going to look at that battle as we go over these next 40 minutes or so, because in some respects, that is true. Look at the way that, we used email early on, and you look at the decline in click-through rates, the decline in engagement on social media, the way that there's so much spam, the way that Groupon had ridiculously open rates early on, and now sometimes you struggle for very, very, very small 0.0 percentages to try and get those click-through rates. Marketers have done that because they jump on the new shiny thing. They do it so incredibly well, but when they don't have the customer's best interests at heart, they don't add enough value, they ruin that platform and move on. And it's often the same thing that's thrown at Pinterest. It's the same thing that's thrown at Instagram with their API, with their ads that they've got coming through. It's the same thing when Snapchat started to charge $750,000 a day to try and do sponsored stories. It's always been about the ethics of marketers trying to do something responsible. So when I was putting all of these slides together, I was actually looking at ethics and thinking about how is it that we try and promote new things, even if it's the most exciting, newest, sexiest thing in the world. Uber, for a number of years was the fastest growing tech company in the world, and I talked about them a lot. I probably talked about them too much, but I was just excited about what they did, mainly because they had a very outspoken CEO, and anyone that's read the news recently knows that he's taken a leave of absence, perhaps even a permanent leave of absence. He's almost a little bit too outspoken, and he wants to say feisty things to get in the news. But they've been able to trade on that in the past because they didn't spend anything on marketing. I just loved the idea that they were providing a service that provided so much value to customers. You push a button, car arrives in 5 minutes. And the algorithms behind the scenes worked so well. They had neuroscientists and rocket scientists trying to work out all of that stuff. Really, really smart people running their data science, their maths teams and their marketing teams. But they had no marketing budget. They relied on the fact that for every 7 rides, that was going to generate 1 new user through word of mouth. And a lot of people were looking at this new shift of trying to do marketing about this is the way that you make people feel, and you treat them, Travis used to say, you treat them like ballers, Travis Kalanick, the CEO of Uber, but if you treat people so well, they're going to go and tell all of their friends. Now, what's actually happened in the industry over the last few years, Uber was only founded in 2008, and a lot of these shifts have really happened since then, certainly within the last 2 or 3 years. It's gone away from the way that we used to monitor what people clicked on. We've spent a lot of time going over this stuff in the past and previous webinars about how to measure clicks and cognitive command centers and social command centers, all this kind of stuff, trying to measure the interactions, what metrics matter most. But what we're seeing now more than ever is that it's not as important to figure out what the engagement is. We've got to figure out more, what do people feel and what mood are they in? And also, more importantly, how do we do that when we don't know their information? We don't know their personal information. Maybe they don't want to share that because a lot of customers have gone and hidden. A lot of customers have got upset the fact that marketers may have abused that relationship of trust. and they're not as easy to give their data anymore. They don't want to download their apps. And you can go and search the story yourself for the full background, but there was a lot of bad stuff that happened with Uber when they started trying to manipulate algorithms or trying to manipulate geo-fences around Apple, trying to feed in fake data to try and really just ultimately get hold of everybody's GPS data. Now, they did that so well that the service worked incredibly well, but also they pushed the boundaries a lot. There was phrases thrown around like morally deep and ethically grey. But the thing that I took out of that as a positive was words that I heard from Brad Voyek, who was the head of data science at the time. He said, you don't need to know everything about everybody anymore. You just need to know a few things about a lot of people. And what he was referring to was as much about the emotions of the audience or all the anonymous data and being able to make decisions on that as he was actually referring to all the personal information that maybe we don't know about people as much anymore. So it marked this huge shift in the way that we started to do business. They had some very, very clever mechanics that could figure out your salary and where you're going to go next and the shops that you might go to, the restaurants you might be interested in. They had all of this demand positioning behind the scenes so that they could push cars to within a certain area to within 15 minutes. Ultimately, that's all a marketer's trying to do, isn't it? We want to figure out where are our customers going to within a window of maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes. If they're on our website, how long are they going to stay there? Shopping cart abandonment technology is fantastic. We have a huge amount of it within Watson Marketing, but sometimes that's not enough. We don't want people to abandon a shopping cart. We want to give them the best experience when they're actually on the site. So let's have a look at some stats. I thought let's go and dig into, is it possible that customers have changed and have banned somewhere else? What about the levels of engagement within the social networks and across different digital channels? So let's just have a look at some of the evidence to start with. And we'll fly through these slides quite quickly. Obviously, you're all welcome to screen grab or download the slides afterwards. And we have recordings of all of these to go and watch again. All of the usual stuff. Facebook's doing super well. Tumblr, seems to be ranking incredibly highly. I think that's slightly suspicious based upon maybe the way that Yahoo measures some of that. Twitter's been plateaued for quite a long time. Snapchat's got super high levels of engagement, but still proportionally, just 300 mil. And then you start seeing all the other networks going through as well. So a lot of that growth has been coming through, and they seem to be going okay for the most part. But when you actually look at the way that people are engaging with networks, I'm going to pick on the biggest. Obviously, let's have a look at Facebook. It's the benchmark just because we've got such a large amount of data to work on. Looking at the amount of original content, the amount of posts, we're seeing a drop of 30% year on year in engagement rates and the amount of content that's being created, and customer engagement is directly linked to that. People don't like brands in the same way that they used to. I had a debate with someone the other day about, do people actually want a relationship with a brand? And this was the CEO of a very, very big media company. He was like, no, people do not want a relationship with a brand. The complete opposite of what Javier Sanchez in his book said about we must make people fall in love with our ideas and our companies, and people fall in love with brands the same way they fall in love with people. I'm not entirely sure that I agree with that, but what the CEO was saying was people just want a good experience. And that's what's going to keep them coming back. And the fact that a lot of brands don't give them that is forcing people away. So what does that mean for the amount of money? Well, what we're seeing is the shifts are declining. So what do you do when the numbers go down and engagement starts dropping? Well, of course, you throw even more money at it. And as you start to see the growth over the next 2 years, and you see this spanning out over 2020, you see that of all the countries in the world, the UK was number one in increased spend going towards digital, and being overtaken by China this year. But is that necessarily the answer? Because engagement's dropping, we have to throw more digital ad spend to try and buy more people's attention. Let's have a look at that in just a second. And I wanted to remind you of a slide as well. As I was putting this together, I was looking at some of those networks, all the ones that were on that slide. And when you do rank them in accordance with the most popular TV channels, actually the levels of engagement have been down for quite a while. Facebook itself doesn't even rank very highly. Even when you look at millennials, you start looking at the young, shiny people, 27th for Facebook going up to 563rd for Snap. I think Twitter ranked about 2003. The levels of engagement aren't what they were, yet marketers still look at this as if we've got to throw all of our money at digital, and we forget that people are still on TV. A lot of consumer behavior is still operating on TV. I was at a conference and said 85% of Gen Z don't watch TV. Really? Are you sure about that? Gen Z is, I hate these terms. But, we commonly refer to anyone that's born after 95 as opposed to millennial, somewhere between a 17, 20-year window from about 1984. But yet when we look at where the actual engagement is, we see that TV is still absolutely smashing those figures. You can see here as well some stats for the way that video on demand and playback. Live TV is still where a lot of attention is. So it really raises a bigger debate. So I thought, well, let's have a look at the numbers that we've got across Europe. Let's have a look at where people are actually spending the majority of their time. And we're seeing, all sorts of interesting stats here. For example, UK adults are spending an average of 9 hours and 25 on media. So it's not that their attention has gone down, it's just that it's split and it's changed. Their attention has moved into a slightly different space. So what does that mean for how we understand where it is that they've gone? And if they are fluctuating backwards and forwards between digital and traditional and print and radio, how on earth do we keep up? Well, a lot of it is just down to understanding where people waste their time. I'll never forget when I started out in social media, when I was first working with enterprise brands. Facebook had just launched its brand platform. This was in 2010. Feels like 2 minutes ago, doesn't it? But it's, 7 years ago now. There was a great phrase that I saw in the wall of the Red Bull Media House. It said 50% of people go online to waste time, so let's give them some cool They swore. I'm not going to swear in the webinar. Let's give them some cool stuff to waste their time with. They were just like, we just need to create value and do good stuff. And what I loved most about Red Bull was they were actually spending 90% of their time engaging with their audience. Only about 10% of it for that particular team was looking at creating the content. It was all about understanding exactly how and why people waste their time, but then saying, that's actually okay. So how could we do that where we don't necessarily need a call to action on the end of it? Couldn't have put it better, could we, than John Lennon himself, time you enjoy wasting is not wasted time. I listen to a beautiful podcast. I listen to podcasts every other day. And there's a great one from the beginning of January, 6 Pixels. It's the Miriam podcast with Mitch Joel. He did a fantastic session. I guarantee it will be worth your time going and listening to it. It's I think it was the first or second week of January, the 6 Pixels podcast. It was with Seth Godin, who, as many of you will know, is my favorite person in the marketing industry. And I made a couple of notes because he was thinking about the way that marketing is now versus the way that it used to be and the way that it's going forward. He was really speaking about attention as an asset. Now, one of the best books in marketing that's been written was Permission Marketing, when Seth wrote that absolute years ago. He was talking about relevant and personal messages that people want to get. Now, as obvious as that sounds today, personalization, we provide right message, right person, right time. 20 years ago, that was completely revolutionary. 20 years ago, marketing and advertising were almost the same thing. And a lot of people, a lot of marketers thought that if you had money, you could pretty much interrupt anybody whenever you wanted. The biggest test of that, of course, was if you didn't interrupt them, if you didn't try and beat them around the head with whatever your piece of content was, would people miss you if you didn't show up? Would they miss you if you didn't post anything? That's the best test now, isn't it? If we didn't post anything for days or weeks or months, would our customers actually care? So really, what Seth was saying on that podcast was that patiently building an asset is the number one most important thing that marketers should be able to do. Patiently building assets and understanding exactly what people may want from that. Because what he said, and this is what struck me the most, this is what I wrote down, he said, people only ever buy from you for 2 reasons. They only ever work with you for 2 reasons. One of them, they know you exist. It's all about awareness. The second one, and the most important, is that they trust you. Only 2 reasons people will ever buy from you. They know you exist and they trust you. Because the thing about paying attention is if I pay you my attention, I don't have it anymore. It's gone forever. So we're getting more and more focused on keeping our attention to ourselves and not just giving it to whoever shows up. And marketers, like we just mentioned, have a history of just taking people's attention and either abusing it or wasting it. And we can't do that anymore. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a place where retailers are abandoning apps, first of all. We're seeing that somewhere between 20 and 25% of all major retailers are abandoning their apps this year, and that's only going to escalate between now and 2020. We've seen that at IBM. We've seen that with reports on Gartner. I did a post about it on LinkedIn last December about the future of apps and where it's going. Where have all your shoppers gone? Beautiful image, right? Isn't that a gorgeous photograph on screen? So one of my friends, Dan Bell, you should go and check out his TED Talk. He does a whole TED Talk about dead shopping malls, about abandoned shopping malls, and he just goes in and takes photographs of them. Very, very eerie, but these beautiful photographs. What does it mean for marketers that think the wrong way, that were maybe not as interested in disruption? They were trying to innovate and do things a little bit faster, but then some of these trends, some of these shifts in behavior completely passed them by. We're in a place now where over the next couple of years there's going to be 1 million devices an hour added to the internet. So we're going to be marketing to algorithms and machines as much as we're marketing to people. A lot of the people will have gone away. A lot of that will be replaced by algorithms. It may be that if you wanted to, we want to get someone to go and ride in our car, that we may be marketing to the algorithms within Uber. What does that mean? I'm sure you all know the story of Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix. He had that $40 late fee for Apollo 13 years ago, and he ended up founding Netflix. It completely turned upside down the industry. Blockbuster's gone bankrupt. All of their customers completely went away from them. They ran into this new thing. I'll never forget at the time, the Blockbuster CEO actually passed on the chance to buy Netflix for $50 million. John Anticoco, he said he was thinking of it as it's a very small niche business, I think he said. And they ended negotiations at the time with Netflix when it was just this DVD mailing service. He was worried about where his customers gone, but he was thinking, well, no, we'll just protect what we've got and we'll just try and maybe discount a little bit more and operate a bit faster. We'll maybe try and beat people around the head with a few more ads. Exactly what we do all the time, isn't it? Now, whilst we are looking at traditional media, we've seen at the growth of TV, we're also looking at things like ads, outdoor ads. Billboards, this fantastic picture here of Times Square. 230 billboards in Times Square, 100 million pedestrians every single day. 100 million pedestrians a year visit this space. And I was thinking about the numbers. I was thinking about the numbers of people that look at billboards when we're trying to figure out people's attention, especially if it seems to be going away from our digital channels. So I looked at some of the stats for 2017, and one of them was saying for the average person that dwells in a city, the average 45-minute journey, you're going to see 130 different ads. Now, you're not going to be clicking on ads, but still, that's a very, very important medium, right? The problem is that marketers still, we struggle to tie that together. We try and put the codes on, we try and put the download codes and the special markers on the ads on the London Tube or on the bus stops and stuff, but we don't often tie together the online and offline. It's only a very, very small percentage of people that do that. Incredibly hard to tie together online and offline. So when we see our engagement dropping down on social, people are still walking around the streets and seeing these billboards, but we're not sure if they're interacting with our brands and if they even care anymore. How do we try and build up that level of trust? Well, if you think back, not actually that long ago, just a decade or so, maybe 2005, we saw an average about 3,500 ads. Now, if you think today that the average person checks their phone about 150 times, and the average person apparently, according to a very, very big survey that Microsoft did of people spending their time on smartphones, was 3 hours and 8 minutes. 3 hours and 8 minutes we waste on our phones every single day as we check them 150 times. The amount of messages that we see today, it was 3,500 in 2005. In 2017, it's over 10,000 messages every single day. I thought it'd be curious, actually, if we had a look at this. You guys might like this. If ever you've wondered how much it is to buy someone's attention in Times Square, there you have it. 2.2 million at the top, going down to about 4. It generally fluctuates on contracts between $2 and about $10 million, but how do you get the return on that, and how do you understand exactly what that is? And because we see executives getting so overwhelmed with these shifts in behavior, and they get overwhelmed with digital, and they think that maybe it doesn't work anymore, people are still throwing their money into all sorts of channels, often that they can't measure. We've got to have a strong multi-channel approach to that. Now, I hate the buzzwords in marketing, but we're going to get into multi-channel and omnichannel in just a second. But we can't do that without just acknowledging the ridiculous amount of data that has been in this time. If we think back to the 2000s and 2005s, when you had just a few thousand messages a day, average amount of data that was pulled from the internet was about 2.5 quintillion bytes every month. Now 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every single day. And it's our jobs to try and make sense of all of that stuff. So as we try and sift through all of the data, it is possible that maybe our customers haven't got anywhere. It's just that there's so much noise, we can't see it anymore. So let's have a look at some of the customer stats. Let's have a look, is this true for your company or for your brand? Well, as I fly through all these numbers, of course, what I haven't done is link the source to every single one. It's on the notes in the slides, but this isn't really meant to be a scientific webinar. This is really just to try and poke around so that you guys feel inspired, hopefully, a sense of urgency to go and find out if this is true for the companies and the clients that you work with. Go and find out what your number is and how much it is declining based upon those 5 W's, the who, what, why, where, and when. Well, first of all, we know that Google is telling us that 5 channels or devices are used when people make the average purchasing decision. That data's been around for a couple of years. Never forget it the first time that I heard it. 5 channels or devices for people that share emotional content, usually around the passion pillars that we used to call them at Facebook: music, TV, fashion, film, and sport. Now, the 2017 version of that research from Google says that 98% of customers switch devices every single day. They're bouncing backwards and forwards between those different devices. There's a great piece of research that you can search from v12data.com, Omnichannel statistics that every marketer should know. Go and have a look at that. And when you look at where that's likely to end up, and you think about where you are in your career, or think about where you were when you started out, maybe you were a head of social media or a community manager somewhere, you was looking at a single channel, then maybe multi-channel came in. We started looking at, we've got our online, we've got our customer service, we've got our email, we've got our mobile teams and our app teams, and then we started looking at how we try and connect those together. We had these cross-channel conversations, and now we're in a place that's 10 times harder than that, because everything is omnichannel. People are bouncing backwards and forwards all the time between their mobiles and their desktops and their laptops and their smartphones and their smart TVs. And analysts are saying that by 2020, customers will demand perfect execution if you are to win their attention. So what exactly does that mean? Well, here's a couple of other interesting stats. 55% of companies have no cross-channel strategy in place. That's from the CMO Club. 64% of marketers say that the lack of resources and investment is their top barrier to omnichannel marketing. That's from the CMO Club as well. And then from the analytics firm SDL, great bunch of people, 90% of customers expect consistent interactions across all of their different channels. So where does that leave us? Well, me and Juliet were at a conference just a couple of weeks ago. We had the pleasure of listening to Tom Ford and a whole bunch of fantastic brands, and there was a lot of fashion brands there as well. But one of them in particular was Future Laboratories, and they were talking about customer journeys. They were talking about how brands are struggling to see where their customers have gone and whether or not they've disappeared. And right at the top of that tree was a lot of the automotive brands. Now, that's the extreme, because they were saying that for this particular automotive brand, 190 stages existed in their customer journey. 190. And it's a marketer's job, in the middle of all of the noise and all of the data and all of the distractions, to understand at every single point in that customer journey, how do you tie them all up? Now, if you're just in media, if you're in telco, it's going to be a lot less than that. You may be looking at fashion, maybe sometimes it may only be somewhere between 5 and 15 stages in that customer journey. But even so, there's going to be a lot. We're going to have a look at some data in a second. Just emphasizes, even with a smaller customer journey, what does that actually mean? And what do the mathematicians say to prove why marketing is now completely out of control? We're going to get to that in about 3 slides. But first of all, I just wanted to remind you of something, because I love that you joined us today for this webinar. You may listen to a lot of other webinars. I'm sure you read a lot of books and hear many people at conferences. What you cannot do is just listen to people like me and people on a stage and think, well, Jeremy said this, therefore we should do that. Because every single company is different. It's up to you to understand what happens to your company. You've got to weigh that up. And there's no one-size-fits-all. The biggest mistakes that brand makes is thinking we need to have a strategy, maybe even an annual strategy. Harvard spoke about it a couple of years ago, 2015. They said 80% of all business strategies are classic. This was a September issue, I think it was. So I encourage you to go and have a look at it, because in that particular article, what they were saying was, if you want to understand the future of where customers are going to go, depending upon what vertical you're in and depending upon what type of company you are, you're going to need a completely different strategy. So one stat that I'm throwing out now may be perfect for Dell, but it's going to be terrible for Pacific Gas. Something about cross-channel may not even be important for Reckitt, but for somebody like Uber, Facebook, Philips, Oculus, it's going to be a really, really big deal. And the great Harvard Business Review, I encourage you to either buy the back issue, you can go on your iPad or your device and go and download the back issue. They're $15, they're pretty expensive, but it is money well spent. But there was a fantastic issue that was how to win and keep customers that pertains to all the stuff that we're talking about today. So, the last time that we spoke about this, the last time that we were looking at all of this marketing data, we were looking at Scott Brinker's chart. I'm not going to dwell on this because I talk about this far too much already, but it does, doesn't it? It just emphasizes how many different marketing technologies there are now trying to solve these problems of where your customers have gone. How do we do omnichannel and cross-channel and multi-channel attribution? How do we try and keep it all in one place now that there's these 5,381 different technologies claiming to do a lot of the same thing? Half of the technologies on this slide are startups. Half of those have got less than 3 staff. And a lot of them are there just to try and help you figure out where your customers have gone. I only show this up to issue it as a word of warning, really, just to be cautious. Be careful who you buy from. Trust is very, very important. Of course, we're all here trying to sell things. We're trying to sell things right now. I would love you to buy all of our Watson marketing stuff, but you've got to make sure that you work with people who believe what you believe, that can do genuinely the right thing for your company and for your brand. Because when you look at that single view, you look at the way that people are bouncing around from all those different channels, whether it's 190 points or whether it's 5, it's incredibly difficult to build a single view of a customer. We're an $82 billion company, and we've got technology that we spend an absolute fortune on. We invest about $6 billion in innovation and research every single year trying to figure out all of this stuff across lots of industries, from IoT and healthcare to education, marketing and commerce. It's really, really difficult to build some of this stuff yourself. You've got to make sure that you're working with people who believe what you believe and who have got trusted platforms that can help you not just figure out what your customers are doing now, but what they're going to do next. So I promised you some math. I promised you some math just to try and talk about where this is all going to go. And let me just describe to you in 90 seconds this conversation I had with a CEO of a very, very big company, but incredibly confident that he understood where his customers had gone, very confident he understood where they were going to go next. And he said, 9 times out of 10, my team is sure. They spend millions and millions of dollars on marketing technology. And he was convinced they had the right structure, the right teams, they had the right tribes and squads, the customer success teams across sales and service and operations, logistics, marketing, customer service. 9 times out of 10, he believed that their teams knew exactly where their customers had gone. So I said, well, let's have a look at that. You got a 90% success rate. Let's not pretend it's 99. Let's pretend it's 90. I suspect it's much less than half of that, but let me just take your word for that. So if we believe, for example, that your average customer, we looked at the lifetime of his customers and how many channels they bounced between and how many visits and devices they had. Let's be really, really conservative. Let's take the lowest common denominators that we've seen for your lifetime value. And your customers are crossing about 5 different channels. They were, during the course of their lifetime with that brand, they were spending about 5 visits. And they're also spending them on about 3 different devices. If you just do the simple math, 5 times 5 is 25. Times by 3, 75. So we've got a 90% success rate to the power of 75. That's 0.004% success rate of understanding the customer journey just across those channels with a 90% success rate. Even if he was 99% accurate across all of those channels, it would still only work out to be about 47% success rate of understanding where his customers had gone. It's even less than the flip of a coin. So when you think about digital transformation, you think about trying to understand all of those stages of the customer journey, what we're seeing is that the average success rate of a digital transformation program currently stands at about 15%. And that's only 2% higher than the odds of going to a casino. It's crazy, isn't it? Now, of course, a lot of those digital transformation programs take a long time to play out. The problem lies in the fact that people within marketing often bounce within their career to a different role in less than 2 years. But oftentimes, the actual project itself is going to take 2 to 3 years to mature and actually show any positive ROI. What does that mean? Does it mean that we go back to looking at the most popular channels? Well, At IBM, we're seeing in a lot of cases, especially in retail, email is still the number one channel. Email is still the most powerful tool, even though the rates have dropped from what they used to. It's still the most effective channel to build out those customer journeys. But what we're finding out is that people don't want to give their data anymore. We've mentioned this before, haven't we? 55% of consumers, according to research just over a year ago, say they don't want to give any data to marketers ever. Talk about this huge spike in ad blocking in stores. Nobody wants to give their email data. That's why it's so difficult. So whilst email may be the number one channel, sometimes it's going to take you a long time to get that email. That's why we're going to show you some of the examples in a minute about this idea of these anonymous projects. It's the thing that we spoke about before, haven't we, about personalization versus personification. We used to be able to do marketing, which was right channel, right message, right time, when I knew all of these different things about my customers, all their personal information, and yet today, we've got to spend our time on personification. We've got to be able to give the right message to the right customer on the right time, on the right channel, when we don't know their information. That's why the quote from Brad Voyek that we looked at before was so important. We don't need to know everything about everybody. We just need to know a few things about a lot of people. So, as we roll into the last 12 minutes or so of this, what does that mean for you guys? What's the solution? What does that mean for where things are going? How do you understand where someone's going to go next? And what type of technology should you be preparing for? Well, one of the ones in particular that I just wanted to mention was, I look at Google Home. I like the Apple HomePods. Maybe a lot of you guys have got Alexa. Maybe you've got Dash or Dots. You've got Echo devices in your homes. You're talking to them. You may be using Siri an awful lot. Google's telling us at the moment that 20% of all searches on Android devices happen by voice. And a lot of those searches are more than 10 words long. By the end of 2019, 30% of all browsing will not involve a screen. Your customers are going to run away, and they're running away pretty fast at the moment. A lot of them are running away to different experiences that will not involve a screen. You guys have got to prepare for that. Why is this important? I was speaking to one of the most conservative companies I've ever come across. It was a telco, but very, very conservative company, very risk averse. But their entire business rests upon knowing where their customers have gone next and making sure they don't churn at the end of their contract. You know the conversation that they're having internally within their innovation teams? At what point over the next 5 years are we going to turn off our website? And we think about what marketing might look like between now and 2022. You've got some of the most traditional businesses in the world already thinking that if we understood exactly where our customers went all the time, the experience that we gave them was so seamless, we wouldn't even need a website. Wouldn't need a website at all. We just integrate with different devices. We'd integrate with command centers within a Tesla dashboard or within the different apps, whether it's Facebook Messenger app, whether it is going to be, Google Home. And we're seeing exactly the same evidence coming through from Gartner. This is a slide I stole from one of their webinars. They do some fantastic webinars. I encourage you to go and have a look at the Gartner Hype Cycle webinars. And the one for last year, which looked at emerging technologies, we see at the top of that, cognitive expert advisors and machine learning, the two most important technologies most likely to mature. But look at the color of those circles. Machine learning is going to mature over the next 2 to 5 years, and cognitive expert advisors, that's advisors that learn to think like people, they're going to mature over the next 5 to 10 years. So this is encouraging, isn't it? This is about, we're right at the very, very beginning of this explosion in the way that everything's going to change, the way that people are going to interact with different types of technologies. I'm seeing this myself. I look within all of the people that are being recruited into IT at the moment. 10% of them are going to have skills that need to build in cognitive engines within whatever it is that they're going to build. We're seeing that by the end of next year, just by the end of 2018, about half of all developers are going to be looking at some type of cognitive technology embedded within whatever they're technology, whether it's a mobile responsive, whether it's app, whether it's going to be some device, whether it's a piece of hardware somewhere. It's an interesting chart. You look at virtual personal assistants. We start looking down here with interesting chart, isn't it? Virtual reality, augmented. It's the hype cycle. What would that mean like if we looked over the next few years, bearing in mind the Scott Brinker chart, of all these new emerging technologies? And as we see on the left, we crammed in everyone investing in these new technologies, trying to figure out what their customers are going to do next. This is how the hype cycle developed, and it's how Scott Brinker built his first marketing technology landscape. If you guys go and look back even just to 2011, the first marketing technology landscape, it had 100 marketing technologies on it. Look at this. This is the AI landscape for this year, 100 startups using AI to try and transform industries. There's just 100 of them at the moment. When we see this in a few years' time, it's probably going to be the same as the MarTech landscape with over 5,000 on it. At the moment, it's still incredibly small. Like I said, we're right at the beginning of this journey. I encourage you guys just to, if you don't understand it, start looking at AI, start looking at cognitive, and don't just look at the artificial intelligence, look at the cognitive assistants. You know, of course you can look at IBM.com/Watson, you can look at the stuff that we've got, but start looking at augmented intelligence as well and seeing what that means. Because when you look at those channels that we explained before, from the single channel all the way through to the omnichannel, 2017, that omnichannel customer engagement now involves conversational AIs, cognitive AIs, human-assisted, advanced voice. Cognition is a way that a system can learn to think like a person. It can understand, it can reason, it can learn, and then it can engage. That's why we've shared with you in the past stories of North Face. If you want an example of exactly what this looks like right now, an example of personification in practice without asking for any personal data, just go and visit thenorthface.com/XPS. If you've not done it before, you'll see one of the most basic forms of an AI that's powering a website. Works on any single device, and it's beautiful. This is using text, it could be using voice, could be doing exactly the same thing. And North Face are seeing now that 80% of people that use it say they would use it again. They've got 60% click-through rates. Shoppers are averaging about 2 minutes on the platform, which was much more than they had before. North Face is now changing its strategy, and they're one of the brands that's looking at, well, maybe we shouldn't spend as much on our apps. We need to develop some of our mobile responsive. There's another one that you can go and have a look at. This is a great example because we work with 1-800-Flowers in the US. This is like an evolution of the North Face story. 1-800-Flowers was one of the world's first e-commerce sites. They were one of the first companies to do telephone ordering, one of the first companies in the world to do e-commerce properly. They're very nervous about a disruptive technology coming in, stealing their lunch. They've got a whole bunch of brands. So what they've done is look at, how do we figure out where people are going to go next? Well, it needs to involve an AI. It's got to involve cognition. It's got to involve natural language processing and an element of machine learning and voice, of course, built into an app over time. And it's a year almost to the day that we started training this when they built their new Gwyn. This is their expert personal shopper. It's like a personal concierge called Gifts When You Need. If you just search Gwyn 1-800-Flowers, you'll see the case study. You can go and play with it yourself. And we tested it just for one brand on 300 products. 12 months later, what we're seeing is that we've got 14 products. There's 75,000 products across 14 brands. There's about 7,000 of them at the site at any one time. You can have a conversation, ask it what you're looking for. It's my mum's birthday coming up this weekend. I tried things like I want a bouquet of sausages. I kept trying to trip it up, just trying to see different types of flowers and see if the personal gift concierge would come back. This is all really fascinating stuff, and I'll tell you why. If you look at the context for this and you look at where all of this stuff is going, a couple of days ago, I had this advert that I saw on my Instagram, and I've saw it a few times, so it was the first time I actually clicked on it just to figure out what exactly is this thing. It looks like a pretty little video. Maybe this week or last week you guys have seen this on your phone as well. It's from Velocity Black, and GQ magazine is saying that this is their favorite app of all time, the greatest app that's ever been built. It's basically just a personal concierge. It's basically just this assistant that's just like a personal shopper that can help you go and swim with whales or play tennis with Roger Federer or go to space or something. You know the thing about this app? £2,000 to download it, £400 just to sign up. You can go to these Michelin-starred restaurants, but why on earth? It's beyond me why somebody would pay that when the technology is available now to be able to have personal concierge, expert personal shoppers built into technologies for free. This is what you guys should be looking at. It works exactly the same way. First of all, someone's going to charge a fortune for it. Economies of scale drop through the floor. Anyone that's on this phone or listening to this webinar later, if you're investing in this type of technology, this is how you're going to start future-proofing your company. You're going to start looking at things like personality insights. Like Javier was saying, we've got to understand the moods and the emotions of our audience. So, where can you go to find out more? And I throw this up not to try and be salesy, of course you're on an IBM webinar, but really just because a lot of this technology nobody else in the world has got. I hope that you guys are listening in because you're interested in new stuff that hasn't been built yet, case studies that don't even exist yet. Well, you can go to ibm.com/Watson and you can see some of these technologies in action. And they're open. You can go and play with them. You can plug some of their APIs, get your developers to come and mess with them within your apps, and hopefully you can go and build on this. So, over the last 4 minutes or so, what does that mean for you? What does that mean for the best advice I could give you? Having shown you that voice is going to be the biggest disruptor of brands over the next 5 years. We've seen the way that Omnichannel is just blown out of all proportion, and even for cars, it may be 190 stages in the customer journey. We've seen that even the best executives with a 90% success rate across their customer journeys are still only having a 0.004% success rate. And you know what that is, by the way? I Googled this the other day just to see what the odds of probability were. And apparently it is the odds of being injured while you're sat on the toilet. That's the odds of having a successful journey just across 5 channels, checking it 5 times on 3 devices. And we wonder why marketers are scared stiff about the future. So, where should you focus? Should you focus on your evangelists? Should you focus on your cheerleaders, your influencers, all the people that love you the most? Absolutely not. If you want to figure out where your customers are going to go next and you want to try and understand how to build a brand that's going to last, your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning. One of the best quotes that I've heard, 10 fantastic words from Bill Gates. Now, we're trying to look at this, for example, going across social. If you guys are interested, follow some of IBM's content as Wimbledon starts to play out. We've been working with Wimbledon for over 27 years. We've got the push notifications through Watson Marketing being powered through the Wimbledon apps. And they're also starting to look at this cognitive approach. So if you get the Wimbledon app, you'll start to see some of this technology coming into play over the next 2 weeks. You'll start to hear about things like the command centers. I'm going down to Wimbledon to run one of these. And this is all understanding not just what people have clicked on, but what mood are they in? And what's the tone of voice and what's the sentiment? And how is that mood and that tone of voice, even without knowing people's personal information, how is that likely to impact topics or content or the type of articles that Wimbledon should publish, the type of ads that they might want to serve, the type of highlights that they might want to show? So what are the best 2 things to bear in mind? First of all, I've shown you some very sexy things. We've talked about some very forward-thinking technologies. But Kevin Kelly put it beautifully. He said, there's no business case for innovation. He said, what you should do is perfect what you know. 88% of brands don't even share their own customer data between their own sales and marketing departments. They're sat on mountains of data and they should be making sense of that. Instead, they just go and acquire new customers. What they should be doing is making sense of what they've got. So whilst a lot of this AI and the voice recognition technology can do some wonderful things, you've got to make sure that your sales, marketing, and customer service is joined up first. Because if that doesn't work, then everything else doesn't matter anyway. And it's all going to fall over. So let me leave you with some wise words from Seth Godin. I recommended his book, Permission Marketing. It's an oldie, but it's a really goodie, turning strangers into friends and friends into customers. I mentioned the 5 W's, but think about this, the rules of marketing from Seth. Who are you trying to reach and what change are you trying to make? How are we trying to provide not just a profitable and a loyal, but how are we trying to provide a meaningful relationship? How much time and money are you prepared to spend in loving your customers? And can you find enough time to be patient to actually go and build some insanely great apps that are going to get people's attention and not just buy their attention, but give them something truly valuable? Because it's quite possible that your audience may not be thousands, tens of thousands, or millions. You don't need to have many, many people following you. Actually, there's a mathematician called Eric Weinstein. He said what's most important is that you just have an influence group of maybe just 2,000 to 3,000. And for many brands, it just means segmenting audiences down. For many influencers, many of you professionals on the phone wanting to further your career, it's more important to have 2,000 to 3,000 people that love what you do than it is to have tens or hundreds of thousands of people who really don't care. Sound good? Hope that was useful. And let's see if we have any questions, Julia.
Yeah, we do. So we've got some great questions in, but first we just want to say thank you, Jeremy, for that. It was very interesting. Lots of really great new stats in there, which is nice to hear. Right, so let's get going with the questions. So, When will consumers start to worry about intrusion?
That's a really good question, and you've continued the trend of every presentation that I've done over the last 12 months of having Q&A about privacy and behavioral tracking. And you know why it's exactly the right thing to ask, because privacy is the biggest concern. We look at levels of trust. They've never been as low in 2017 as they have in the history of, certainly as far as marketers have been tracking this stuff. Edelman's been tracking it for 27 years, and they're saying as well, lowest levels of trust of all time. The interesting thing about behavioral tracking is that it doesn't require any personal information. So when you look at something like the Personality Insights API from IBM Watson, that's really just looking at public data and trying to figure out what mood you're in. How happy, how excited, how emotional, how adventurous, how likely to challenge authority might you be? You know, what are the levels of emotion and what types of emotion are they in the way that you speak on, maybe on Twitter, the way that you may post comments on YouTube or LinkedIn. That anonymous information that's really just looking at your emotions, that's worth gold to a marketer, because I can understand the tone of voice that I need to speak to you with. It may be that my brand is incredibly trusted. A lot of financial services brands, because they're so heavily regulated, a lot of them are very highly trusted, but the levels of emotion are incredibly low. So really, it's not about any form of intrusion. It's certainly not an invasion of privacy at all. What it is about, though, is an education of how do we actually go and let people know exactly what it is. So my best advice to you would be is if you're going out talking to your customers about this stuff, we need to let them know in advance the levels of transparency that we have. And 3 great questions that we should all be thinking about ourselves, but also making sure that our customers understand. What data do they have? What are they doing with it? And where exactly is that data being stored? Those are all the sorts of things that we should be obsessed with at the moment, because as we start to educate our audience, they will understand that whilst I may not be giving you my information, you're still providing a great experience. And if that experience is so good, maybe I'm going to give you some information afterwards. That's the philosophy of the North Face and why that website operates like that. Great question. If we were to ask for people's data and we start getting in the realms of facial recognition to try and tag their face, to get their information with all, that's a completely different thing altogether. Behavioral tracking is a completely different thing.
Oh, that's interesting. Thanks, Jeremy. So I think we've got time maybe for one more question. This is a good one. How do you see customers engaging with brands in the next 10 years?
Customers are going to engage with brands over the next decade in exactly the same way that they engaged with them in the previous decade and the decade before that. People are going to work with brands and companies that they trust. They're going to want to do business with people that they like. There needs to be a relationship there built upon mutual respect. None of that's going to change. That's a great question, Chelsea, but it's all that we're seeing now is that attention has dropped through the floor. It may only be 5 seconds, may even be less than that. For an email, it may be half a second. But whilst we've got so much noise and such short attention spans, we still need to get to the root of how to build that emotional connection with our audience. And being able to do that at scale incredibly fast, the mechanics of it and the philosophy behind it hasn't changed. It's just that now we might need to deal with thousands or millions of customers at the same time. And that's where technology can help. Customers used to be able to do that one-on-one. You know, the old shops of 100 years ago with their small communities, they could do that one-on-one. And you're a bigger brand now and you've got access to the entire global marketplace. You need technology to help you. Hopefully, that's where IBM can step in and help.
Great. That's all we've got time for today, but thank you, everybody, for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.